Flight 582 was a picture of normalcy as it soared above the clouds. The Boeing 737 was cruising at a steady 30,000 feet, gliding through clear skies on its scheduled route from Dallas to Denver. Inside the cabin, the usual hum of conversations mingled with the soft chimes of the in-flight service trolley rolling down the aisle. Passengers were settling into their routines, some flipping through magazines, others watching movies on tiny screens, a few dozing lightly with neck pillows hugging their heads. It was just another mid-morning flight in the vast tapestry of American air travel, one of the thousands that took to the skies every day without incident. At the front of the plane, Captain James Harris sat firmly in the pilot's seat, his eyes scanning the instrument panel with the calm focus born of over 20 years of flying experience. Captain Harris was a veteran of the skies, dependable, steady, and respected by his crew and passengers alike. His co-pilot, First Officer Lisa Morales, had just stepped out to the restroom, leaving Harris alone at the controls for a brief moment. The hum of the engines was steady, the weather reports clear, and air traffic control communications routine. In the cabin, a man sat quietly, almost unnoticed amid the sea of travelers. Daniel Cole was a passenger like any other, dressed casually in jeans and a leather jacket, headphones resting around his neck as he flipped the pages of a military history book. But Daniel was far from an ordinary passenger. A recently retired Air Force pilot, Daniel had spent the past decade flying some of the most advanced aircraft in the world, including the F-22 Raptor, the pride of the U.S. Air Force's fighter fleet. He had flown countless missions, trained rigorously, and learned to stay calm under pressure. Today, though, he was just Daniel, a man traveling home after visiting family. As the flight cruised along smoothly, passengers chatted softly or sat immersed in their own thoughts. Flight attendants moved down the aisles, offering drinks and snacks, their smiles warm and practiced. The atmosphere was calm, relaxed, the kind of peaceful monotony that characterizes most flights at cruising altitude. But at 30,000 feet, far above the sprawling cities and endless fields below, things changed in an instant. Captain Harris's hands were steady on the yoke, when suddenly, without warning, he slumped forward in his seat. It happened so quickly that at first, it was unclear what was happening. His head drooped, and his body went limp. The sudden, unnerving silence in the cockpit was a stark contrast to the steady drone of the engines outside. The autopilot had been engaged, but the human element, the man guiding the plane, was gone. In the cabin, a flight attendant walking toward the cockpit noticed the silence from behind the door. She hesitated, then knocked gently, calling out, "Captain, are you all right?" No response came. The door remained closed. Passengers started to notice something was wrong. A few glanced toward the front of the plane, confusion spreading in their eyes. Murmurs grew into whispers, whispers into anxious questions. Is everything okay? Why hasn't the pilot spoken to air traffic control in a while? The familiar voice over the speakers that usually updated them on weather or flight progress was absent. Back in the cockpit, the flight attendant's worry deepened. She pulled the emergency access code to open the cockpit door. Inside, she found Captain Harris collapsed over the controls, unconscious. His skin was pale, his breathing shallow. The sudden reality struck her. The pilot was incapacitated, and the plane was still flying at cruising altitude, with no one actively piloting. The emergency alarm sounded softly in the cabin, a signal the crew used to prepare for urgent situations without causing immediate panic. The lead flight attendant quickly moved through the aisles, her voice calm but firm as she informed the passengers, "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and stay calm. We are experiencing a medical emergency in the cockpit. The crew is trained for situations like this, and we ask for your patience." Still, fear and uncertainty rippled through the cabin. What happens if no one can control the plane? Who could take over? Among the passengers, Daniel Cole felt the atmosphere shift instantly. His military instincts kicked in, the kind of gut feeling trained by years of emergency drills and high-pressure missions. He stood up quietly, moving toward the cockpit before anyone could stop him. He was met with tense faces, flight attendants and crew who knew their roles but were clearly unsettled. Daniel introduced himself briefly. "I'm a pilot, military background. Let me help." His voice was steady and confident, cutting through the anxiety like a beacon. The cockpit door opened, and Daniel stepped inside. He found Captain Harris still unconscious and barely breathing. The co-pilot had not yet returned, and the autopilot was still engaged, but this was no time for hesitation. Daniel quickly took stock of the instruments, confirmed the plane's altitude and heading, and accessed the radio. He knew what had to be done. Call for emergency assistance, declare a medical emergency, and get guidance from air traffic control. Using the cockpit radio, Daniel sent out a distress call, but instead of a civilian flight identifier, he used his old military call sign, Raptor 01, declaring emergency, pilot incapacitated, requesting immediate assistance. The crackling radio transmission caught the attention of nearby military aircraft, specifically 2 F-22 Raptors on routine patrol in the vicinity. The use of Raptor 01 immediately alerted the pilots. It wasn't just another commercial flight calling for help. This was a signal from a fellow pilot, a brother in arms. Back on the ground, air traffic control flagged the emergency and scrambled to coordinate a response. They alerted emergency medical teams at the destination airport and established priority landing protocols. Meanwhile, the F-22 pilots adjusted their flight paths, closing in to provide escort and support. Inside the cabin, passengers tried to remain calm. Some prayed quietly, others held the hands of loved ones. Few understood the unfolding drama behind the cockpit door, the life-or-death battle taking place at the controls of their airplane. For Daniel, the moment was surreal. Here he was, a passenger on a routine flight, suddenly thrust into the role of a pilot in an emergency, unlike any other. He drew on every ounce of training, focus, and calm he had honed over years of service. The plane was flying true, but every second counted. Captain Harris remained unconscious, his condition uncertain. Daniel monitored his vital signs, trying to keep him stable while managing the plane's controls. The autopilot maintained the flight path, but the manual override was ready if needed. Daniel prepared to guide the aircraft safely down, relying on the communications with the F-22 pilots and air traffic controllers. The sky outside was still clear, the sun casting a golden glow over the horizon. Inside the plane, time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, an eternity in minutes. And all the while, the passengers remained unaware that their fate hung on the courage and quick thinking of one man, responding not as a civilian, but as a warrior trained to face the unexpected. Captain James Harris had always been a picture of calm professionalism. For over 2 decades, he had piloted commercial aircraft across the United States and abroad, navigating storms and technical glitches alike. Today, however, something was wrong. The cabin crew, the passengers, and even Daniel Cole felt the shift instantly. But no one could have predicted the sudden collapse that would turn this routine flight into a desperate struggle for survival. The moment it happened, the entire cockpit seemed to freeze in time. Captain Harris had been at the controls, monitoring the plane's instruments as they glided above the clouds. His hands were steady on the yoke. His eyes flicked between gauges and altimeters. The autopilot was engaged, but his role was far from passive. He remained the crucial overseer of every second of flight. Suddenly, his body slumped forward. The motion was so swift and unexpected that it caught even him off guard. One moment he was upright, alert, and focused. The next, his head dropped against the instrument panel, and his hand slipped from the controls. His breathing became shallow and uneven. Lisa Morales, the first officer, had just returned from the restroom when the door to the cockpit closed behind her. She saw immediately that something was wrong. Captain Harris was unresponsive, slumped over with a pale face. The worry in her eyes deepened as she called out his name, shaking his shoulder gently, but there was no response. The cockpit was suffused with an eerie silence, broken only by the steady drone of the engines and the blinking lights of the plane's instruments. The autopilot held the plane steady, but with the pilot unconscious and the co-pilot momentarily stunned, the flight was in peril. In the cabin, passengers began to sense the growing tension. Flight attendants, trained to detect even subtle signs of distress, exchanged anxious glances. The comforting announcements that usually kept nerves steady were absent, replaced by the faint hum of the plane and whispered speculations. One flight attendant hurried to the cockpit door and knocked firmly. "Captain Harris? Are you okay?" She called out, voice calm but urgent. No reply came. The door was locked, but the code for emergency access was known by the senior flight attendant. She entered the override code and gently pushed the door open. Inside, the sight was alarming. Captain Harris was pale, his body limp and motionless against the control panel. His eyes were closed, and a faint, uneven breath escaped his lips. The flight attendant called out for medical help over the intercom, instructing the crew to prepare for a medical emergency. Meanwhile, Daniel Cole had risen from his seat near the front of the cabin. His training kicked in immediately. Years in the Air Force had drilled into him the importance of quick assessment and decisive action in emergencies. Without hesitation, he moved towards the cockpit, determined to help. The other passengers watched, confusion and fear mounting. Who was this man stepping into the cockpit? Was he a doctor? A pilot? No one knew, but Daniel's calm and purposeful stride was reassuring amid the growing unease. Once inside the cockpit, Daniel quickly assessed the situation. He noted Captain Harris's shallow breathing and pale complexion. The pilot's pulse was faint but present. Daniel reached for the emergency medical kit stored within the cockpit, pulling out an oxygen mask and administering it to the unconscious captain. "Someone needs to get the co-pilot," Daniel said firmly. "We need to stabilize the pilot and get this plane landed safely." One of the flight attendants nodded and moved swiftly to locate First Officer Morales. Meanwhile, Daniel took control of the radio. He knew that the autopilot could maintain altitude and heading, but the plane still needed a pilot. Daniel's hands, steady from years of flying fighter jets, danced over the controls. He switched the radio to the emergency frequency and sent out a call. His voice was calm but firm. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Flight 582. Pilot incapacitated. Requesting immediate assistance. Raptor 01. The use of the call sign Raptor 01 was deliberate. It was Daniel's old Air Force identifier, a name that would catch the attention of military pilots in the area. This call was different from a standard civilian distress signal, and it signaled the urgency of the situation. From his seat in the cabin, Daniel could hear the murmurs of the passengers as they processed the news. The captain was unconscious. The plane was in trouble, but now someone was taking charge. Back in the cockpit, Daniel monitored Captain Harris's condition, applying oxygen and checking vital signs. He was trained in battlefield medicine and knew enough to keep the pilot stable until professional medical help could arrive. Minutes ticked by, but to Daniel and everyone on board, they stretched like hours. Outside the windows, the world was silent and vast. Inside, tension hung heavy. Suddenly, the co-pilot returned to the cockpit. Lisa Morales, eyes wide with concern, quickly took in the scene. She was trained, but even she was shaken by the sudden collapse of her captain. Daniel briefed her quickly. "Captain's unconscious. I've administered oxygen and sent a distress call. The autopilot is holding steady, but we need to prepare for landing." Lisa nodded, the adrenaline sharpening her focus. Together, they began coordinating with air traffic control. The radio crackled in response. "Flight 582, this is Denver approach. We read you loud and clear. Emergency services are standing by. What's your current status?" Daniel's voice came steady. "Pilot incapacitated. Autopilot engaged. Request immediate clearance to descend and land." As the plane began its slow descent toward Denver International Airport, Daniel and Lisa worked side by side. Passengers were instructed to remain calm and seated. Flight attendants reassured them as best they could. Daniel moved back to check on Captain Harris. His condition remained fragile. He was alive but unconscious, likely suffering from a severe medical event, possibly a heart attack or stroke. The precise cause was unclear, but every second without proper care risked disaster. Meanwhile, Lisa contacted the cockpit medical kit again, retrieving a portable defibrillator and other emergency equipment. She prepared to assist Daniel in stabilizing the captain further. The passengers were tense, but largely unaware of the full severity of the situation. Some whispered prayers. Others gripped armrests or held hands. Suddenly, a loud thud came from the cockpit door, the sound of it being closed firmly. Daniel realized that the military jets had arrived. From outside, two sleek F-22 Raptors cut through the sky, their stealthy forms unmistakable against the backdrop of blue. The fighter pilots had heard the call sign, Raptor 01, and responded immediately. The Raptors fell into formation alongside Flight 582, providing an escort as the commercial plane began its descent. To the crew on the ground and air traffic control, the presence of the fighters signaled the gravity of the situation. Inside the plane, Daniel felt a surge of hope. The fighters were not just escorts. They were lifelines, ready to guide and assist in any way possible. As Flight 582 moved closer to the airport, emergency crews mobilized, preparing for a landing that could mean the difference between life and death. The minutes that followed were tense and filled with controlled urgency. Daniel and Lisa worked seamlessly, their combined experience and training guiding every decision. Daniel's mind was sharp, focused on the task at hand, yet he was also aware of the fragility of the situation. Captain Harris's collapse was a stark reminder that even the most experienced pilots were vulnerable. The plane descended steadily, cutting through layers of clouds, the city lights of Denver coming into view below. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their flashing lights visible even from the cockpit windows. Daniel kept a close eye on the captain, checking his pulse and breathing, administering oxygen as best as he could. Lisa coordinated with air traffic control to secure a priority landing. The runway was cleared of other traffic, and all systems were prepared for the emergency touchdown. As the plane neared the ground, Daniel prepared to assist Lisa in taking manual control if necessary. The autopilot was reliable, but with an unconscious pilot and a co-pilot under stress, every precaution mattered. Passengers braced for landing, some gripping each other's hands, some closing their eyes in silent hope. The plane touched down smoothly on the runway, tires screeching against the asphalt. Relief washed over the cabin in waves, as cheers and tears broke out among the passengers and crew. Emergency medical teams rushed to the plane, immediately attending to Captain Harris. Daniel stepped aside, his role shifting from pilot to bystander as professionals took over. The medical team stabilized the captain and rushed him to a waiting ambulance. Daniel watched quietly, his heart heavy but hopeful. The sudden collapse had shocked everyone, but thanks to Daniel's quick thinking and the coordinated response of military and civilian teams, Disaster had been averted. As the plane taxied to the gate, passengers began to process the extraordinary ordeal they had survived. The calm routine of the flight was shattered, replaced by a powerful story of courage, expertise, and teamwork high above the clouds. Daniel sat back in his seat, exhaustion beginning to seep in, but a quiet sense of fulfillment settled in his chest. Today, he had been more than just a passenger. He had been the difference between tragedy and survival. Daniel Cole was not your average traveler. While to most passengers on Flight 582, he was just another face in the crowd, a man reading quietly in the window seat, headphones resting around his neck. His story was far more complex. His presence aboard that plane would prove pivotal, but it wasn't by chance. His background, forged through years of intense training and service, uniquely equipped him to respond when disaster struck at 30,000 feet. Born in a small town in Ohio, Daniel's passion for flight began early. As a child, he would spend hours gazing up at the sky, watching airplanes carve their trails across the blue canvas. His fascination quickly grew into a determined ambition to become a pilot, not just any pilot, but one who could fly the most advanced aircraft and defend his country. Daniel's journey began at the Air Force Academy, where he excelled academically and physically. The rigors of pilot training tested him in every way, mentally, physically, and emotionally. From early morning drills to complex flight simulations, he was pushed to the limits. But Daniel thrived under pressure. His instructors recognized him as someone with rare talent and composure, qualities essential for the high-stakes world of military aviation. After graduation, Daniel was assigned to one of the Air Force's most elite fighter squadrons. Flying the F-22 Raptor, a cutting-edge stealth fighter jet known for its agility, speed, and advanced technology. Flying an F-22 was a privilege reserved for the best, and Daniel quickly earned a reputation as one of the squadron's most skilled pilots. His missions varied from routine patrols to high-intensity training exercises, each demanding flawless precision and split-second decision-making. The cockpit of an F-22 was a place where hesitation could mean disaster, and Daniel had learned to trust his instincts while maintaining absolute control. The training was grueling, but it instilled a discipline and calm that stayed with him long after he left the Air Force. In his decade-long career, Daniel experienced situations most civilians would only read about. Mid-air emergencies, hostile engagements, equipment failures, he had faced them all. Each challenge taught him something new about resilience and quick thinking, about the importance of clear communication and teamwork. Those lessons would soon become invaluable. Despite his military background, Daniel was humble. After retiring from active duty, he sought a quieter life, reconnecting with family and pursuing interests outside of aviation. On this particular day, he was returning from a visit to his sister's family in Texas. The commercial flight was supposed to be uneventful, a chance to relax before resuming his everyday life. Yet fate had different plans. As he sat reading a book on military aviation history, Daniel noticed subtle signs around the cabin, the attentive eyes of the crew, the quiet exchanges between flight attendants. When Captain Harris collapsed, Daniel's military instincts immediately kicked in. Where others might panic or freeze, Daniel saw a problem to solve. His training meant that emergency situations were ingrained in his muscle memory. He knew the protocols, the language, the procedures, all of which gave him confidence to step forward. His military call sign, Raptor 01, wasn't just a relic of his past. It was a lifeline, a signal to others trained like him that a fellow pilot was in trouble. But Daniel's qualifications went beyond just flying skills. Throughout his career, he had also been trained in emergency medical procedures. In the Air Force, pilots were often the first responders in isolated or hostile environments, making basic medical knowledge critical. Daniel had taken numerous courses in first aid, trauma care, and CPR knowledge that would soon be put to the test. When he found Captain Harris unconscious, Daniel didn't hesitate. He quickly administered oxygen and checked vital signs, drawing on his medical training to stabilize the pilot until more advanced help arrived. His ability to remain calm and focused under pressure was the result of years spent preparing for moments just like this. But Daniel also understood the limits of his situation. Flying a commercial airliner was different from piloting an F-22 fighter jet. The controls were larger, the systems more complex, and the responsibilities heavier when hundreds of lives were at stake. He didn't pretend to be an expert on commercial aviation, but his fundamental skills gave him the confidence to assist the crew and communicate effectively with air traffic controllers. His military background also shaped how he viewed teamwork and leadership. Daniel knew that emergencies were not solo efforts. They required coordination, trust, and clear communication. He quickly established a working rapport with First Officer Lisa Morales, sharing vital information and supporting her as she stepped into a more active role. Together, they formed a critical partnership, combining their expertise to keep the plane stable and on course. Daniel's calm, methodical approach helped to calm the cabin as well. His demeanor inspired confidence not only among the crew, but among the passengers, many of whom were growing anxious as news of the emergency spread. His presence was a reminder that even in moments of crisis, experience and training could make all the difference. The story of Daniel Cole's background is a testament to the value of preparation and service. It's a reminder that sometimes extraordinary people appear in ordinary places, ready to step up when it matters most. As Flight 582 continued its descent toward Denver, Daniel's thoughts briefly shifted from the immediate crisis to the broader implications. The incident would likely lead to reviews and investigations, changes in policy and procedure. But for now, his focus was singular, ensuring the safe landing of everyone aboard. He looked out the window, the city lights of Denver growing brighter against the night sky. The runway was approaching, and the emergency teams were ready. Daniel's journey from a small Ohio town to the cockpit of Flight 582 was a winding path shaped by dedication, skill, and an unwavering sense of duty. That path had prepared him for this moment, a moment when his past and present collided high above the ground, and a man who had once flown the fastest jets in the world became the unexpected guardian of hundreds of lives. High above the Rocky Mountains, two F-22 Raptors sliced through the clear blue sky with unmatched precision and speed. These jets were among the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, piloted by some of the U.S. Air Force's finest aviators. On this routine patrol, pilots Captain Emily Reed and Lieutenant Marcus Shaw were scanning the horizon, their eyes sharp, instruments humming, when suddenly an unusual radio transmission cut through the calm airwaves. Raptor 01 declaring, "Emergency, pilot incapacitated, requesting immediate assistance." The call was unmistakable, clear, urgent, and carrying a weight beyond a typical civilian distress signal. Captain Reed's brow furrowed as she exchanged a quick glance with Lieutenant Shaw. "Did you hear that?" Reed asked, her voice calm but alert. "Yeah," Shaw replied. "That call sign, Raptor 01, that's a military designation." The two pilots had been trained extensively on emergency protocols, not only for their aircraft, but also for coordinated responses to civilian aircraft. In distress, especially when military or former military personnel were involved, the call sign immediately caught their attention because it was their own, a signal that another pilot, perhaps a fellow aviator in need, was reaching out. The F-22's advanced radar and communication systems quickly locked onto Flight 582's commercial Boeing 737. They confirmed its position at 30,000 feet, cruising steadily, but now marked by a critical emergency. Reed's fingers danced over the controls as she initiated contact with Denver Air Traffic Control. informing them of the emergency and their intent to escort the distressed aircraft. Denver approach. This is Raptor lead. We are responding to Flight 582, which has declared a medical emergency. Request priority clearance for escort and assistance, Reed reported. Denver's control tower immediately responded, clearing. The Raptors for priority approach and alerting emergency services on the ground to prepare for an urgent landing. As they closed in on Flight 582, Reed and Shaw observed the Boeing 737 from a distance. The commercial plane was flying straight and level, but its behavior told a story of concern. The autopilot held the aircraft steady, but there was no sign of active pilot input. Reed's experience as an F-22 pilot gave her a unique perspective on cockpit dynamics. "It's rare," she said, "to see a commercial flight call out using a military call sign. Whoever's on board must have a military background." Shaw nodded, adding, "And the message was clear. Pilot incapacitated. We need to be ready to assist with guidance and coordination." Both pilots understood the gravity of the situation. A commercial aircraft in distress at high altitude, with an unconscious pilot, was a scenario fraught with potential disaster. Their role was clear: to act as guardians, to provide whatever support possible from the skies. The Raptors moved into formation alongside Flight 582. From inside the cockpit of the Boeing, Daniel Cole could see the sleek jets, their angular frames cutting through the air with silent efficiency. The sight was reassuring, a symbol of strength and solidarity. Reed and Shaw maintained close radio contact with Daniel and First Officer Morales, offering guidance and support. Their communications were precise and professional, helping to ease the tension in the cockpit. Flight 582. Reed's voice came steady over the radio. "This is Raptor Lead. We're here to escort you to Denver. You're doing a great job. Let us know if you need any assistance with navigation or systems." Daniel responded, his voice calm but focused. "Copy, Raptor Lead. We're stable for now, but we'll need priority clearance for emergency landing." The Raptors adjusted their speed and altitude to stay in close formation, ready to respond to any sudden changes. As they approached Denver International Airport, the emergency crews on the ground were already mobilized. Fire trucks, ambulances, and medical teams lined the runway, prepared for a critical reception. Reed and Shaw's presence was more than symbolic. Their advanced avionics allowed them to monitor Flight 582's telemetry remotely, providing valuable data to the airport and air traffic controllers. This data helped coordinate the safest and most efficient landing path, minimizing risk. Inside Flight 582, the cooperation between the commercial crew, Daniel Cole, and the F-22 pilots was seamless. Despite the pressure, the teamwork showcased a remarkable fusion of civilian and military expertise. Daniel reflected on the irony. Once flying solo in the cockpit of an F-22 at supersonic speeds, he was now relying on two fighter pilots for support while managing a commercial airliner in crisis. The Raptor's escort provided not only technical assistance, but also a psychological boost. The passengers, though unaware of all the details, felt a growing sense of reassurance. The presence of military jets nearby was a silent promise that every resource was being marshaled to ensure their safety. Reed and Shaw stayed with Flight 582 until it was safely on the ground, their missions complete, but their vigilance unwavering until the last moment. Once Flight 582 touched down smoothly, the F-22 pilots saluted the teamwork that had brought the situation to a safe resolution. The story of the emergency would soon become a powerful testament to the unexpected ways military and civilian worlds intersect, where experience, training, and quick action could turn a potential tragedy into a story of survival. The runway lights stretched out ahead of Flight 582 like a glowing ribbon guiding the plane home. Inside the cockpit, tension coiled tightly in every muscle of First Officer Lisa Morales and Daniel Cole. The autopilot maintained the steady descent, but it was clear that the human element would soon be needed. "Brace for landing," Lisa said quietly but firmly over the intercom, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. Passengers instinctively gripped their armrests, some closing their eyes, others clutching loved ones' hands. The cabin filled with a low murmur of whispered prayers and muffled breaths. Flight attendants moved quietly down the aisles, doing their best to keep calm and reassure everyone. Daniel glanced over at Lisa. Her face was pale but resolute. They had rehearsed for emergencies during training, but nothing quite prepared them for this moment. A commercial plane with an unconscious captain and a first officer suddenly thrust into command, supported by a passenger who was no ordinary civilian. "Lisa," Daniel said softly, "I can take controls manually if you need. Just tell me." Lisa shook her head. "You're the passenger, Daniel. I'm the first officer. You focus on the pilot. I'll handle the landing." Daniel nodded. The line of duty was clear. He turned back to Captain Harris, who lay slumped over the control panel, breathing shallow but alive. On the ground, emergency personnel awaited the plane's arrival with bated breath. Fire trucks, ambulances, and paramedics were lined up along the taxiway, their flashing lights casting an urgent glow into the dusk. Every second counted. Denver International's air traffic control had cleared Flight 582 for an immediate emergency landing. The control tower staff monitored the situation intently, coordinating with ground responders and the F-22 pilots still escorting the plane. As Flight 582 touched down, the tires screeched softly against the runway, a sound that felt like a collective exhale from everyone aboard. The landing was smooth, a testament to Lisa's calm under pressure and the silent support of Daniel's medical care. The plane taxied slowly to the designated gate, where the emergency response team sprang into action. Doors were opened swiftly, and paramedics rushed inside. Daniel and Lisa stepped aside as the medical team carefully lifted Captain Harris onto a stretcher. His skin was clammy, and his pulse weak, but he was alive. The paramedics worked quickly, stabilizing him for transport to a nearby hospital. Passengers remained seated, their initial shock settling into a mix of relief and lingering anxiety. The cabin crew began communicating updates, thanking everyone for their cooperation. Outside the plane, news crews had already gathered, sensing that something extraordinary had unfolded in the skies above Denver. Social media buzzed with fragments of the story, though the full details were still emerging. Inside the terminal, Daniel found himself surrounded by crew members and passengers expressing gratitude. Many called him a hero, though Daniel deflected the praise, emphasizing the teamwork that had saved the day. Lisa, still catching her breath, smiled tiredly at Daniel. "I don't know what would have happened without you." Daniel shook his head. "You did the hard part. Landing this plane with an unconscious pilot, that's no small feat." The two shared a quiet moment of mutual respect, their bond forged in crisis. Meanwhile, emergency medical personnel transported Captain Harris to a waiting ambulance. His condition was critical but stable, and the hospital's trauma team was ready to provide the advanced care he needed. As the adrenaline faded, Daniel's thoughts turned reflective. The experience had tested everything he knew about flying, medicine, and human resilience. It was a stark reminder that life could change in an instant, and that preparation mattered. The story of Flight 582 would soon be told in detail, highlighting the bravery and quick thinking of everyone involved, from the crew to the passengers, the military pilots in the sky, and the emergency teams on the ground. For Daniel, it was a moment that reaffirmed his sense of purpose, a chapter in a life shaped by service and dedication. But for now, as the plane emptied and the airport returned to its usual rhythm, Daniel quietly made his way toward the exit, ready to leave behind the extraordinary and return to the ordinary, though forever changed by what had just transpired at 30,000 feet. In the aftermath of the emergency landing of Flight 582, the atmosphere shifted from immediate relief to rigorous scrutiny. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, along with the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, swiftly launched a full investigation into the incident. The key questions loomed large. What caused Captain Harris to collapse? How did the crew manage such a delicate crisis? And what lessons could be drawn to prevent future occurrences? The investigation began promptly at Denver International Airport. The NTSB team arrived equipped with their standard toolkit: black boxes for data extraction, flight records, medical reports, and expert personnel ready to comb through every detail. For the airline and everyone involved, this was a critical moment. At the center of the inquiry was Captain Robert Harris, the pilot who had become incapacitated mid-flight. Initial medical reports suggested a sudden cardiac event, but more tests were necessary to confirm the cause. The hospital kept Harris under close observation, while investigators sought to understand if any underlying health issues had been missed, or if other factors might have contributed. Meanwhile, the airline cooperated fully, providing logs, cockpit voice recordings, and technical data. They also conducted internal reviews to assess their emergency protocols and training standards, ensuring transparency and thoroughness. Daniel Cole, the passenger whose calm intervention had played a vital role, was asked to give a formal statement. The media had begun to recognize him as a hero, a retired Air Force pilot with a remarkable story of quick thinking and bravery. But Daniel remained modest, emphasizing the teamwork that had saved lives rather than individual accolades. At the press briefing held by the FAA, spokesperson Jennifer Clark spoke carefully but confidently. This incident highlights the importance of training, preparedness, and collaboration between civilian and military aviation, Clark said. Thanks to the professionalism of the flight crew, the support of the military escort, and the swift medical response, the outcome was far better than it could have been. News outlets across the country picked up the story quickly. Headlines praised Daniel as a hero passenger, while also shining a light on the seamless coordination between different agencies. Social media exploded with messages of gratitude and awe, many expressing hope that such an event would lead to strengthened safety measures. Amidst the public attention, some voices raised questions about pilot health screenings. Was there enough oversight to catch conditions that could lead to incapacitation? Would the airline industry revise policies to ensure pilots were medically fit for duty? These conversations fueled broader debates in aviation circles, prompting regulatory agencies to review their standards. Some experts advocated for more frequent health evaluations, while others stressed the importance of in-flight emergency preparedness for all crew members. For Daniel, the media spotlight was uncomfortable but inevitable. Interviews poured in, with journalists eager to capture his perspective. He spoke candidly about the mix of fear and determination that had surged through him when the emergency began. "I wasn't thinking about being a hero," he said during one televised interview. "I was just trying to help. My training kicked in. That's what you do when people's lives are on the line." His humility struck a chord with viewers, and many found inspiration in his story. Veterans and civilians alike praised his example, seeing in Daniel a bridge between military discipline and civilian courage. Lisa Morales, the first officer, also received recognition for her composure and skill. The airline awarded her a commendation, and aviation organizations highlighted her as a role model for women in the industry. In the weeks that followed, the FAA announced plans to integrate lessons learned from Flight 582 into training programs nationwide. This included enhanced emergency communication protocols and simulations, involving unexpected pilot incapacitation scenarios. The investigation continued methodically. Technical experts analyzed the black boxes, piecing together the final moments before Captain Harris's collapse. Medical examiners studied his health, history, and autopsy reports to identify any warning signs that might have been overlooked. Ultimately, the findings pointed to a sudden heart arrhythmia, a rare but potentially fatal condition that had struck without warning. The investigation concluded that Captain Harris had acted professionally until the moment of incapacitation, and that the crew's response had been exemplary. This conclusion brought a mix of closure and reflection. The aviation community recognized the fragility of human health, even among highly trained professionals. It also underscored the critical importance of preparedness for every possible emergency. As the public digested the news, Flight 582 became a case study in crisis management. Airlines began reassessing their policies, ensuring pilots and crew received not only medical evaluations, but also ongoing training to handle incapacitation events. Daniel's role remained a focal point, inspiring discussions about how retired military personnel can contribute unique skills in civilian contexts. His story resonated deeply with many who saw in him a reminder that experience and readiness can make a profound difference. Back at home, Daniel reflected on the whirlwind of events. The days of intense scrutiny and media attention had passed, but the impact lingered. He stayed in touch with Lisa Morales and some of the crew, sharing a bond forged in extraordinary circumstances. He also kept an eye on the broader changes inspired by the incident, hopeful that Flight 582's crisis would lead to lasting improvements in aviation safety. The investigation had closed, but the story was far from over. Flight 582's tale of courage, skill, and teamwork would be told and retold, a reminder that even in the face of sudden disaster, human ingenuity and cooperation could prevail. In the months following the dramatic emergency aboard Flight 582, the reverberations of the event extended far beyond the walls of Denver International Airport. What began as a sudden medical crisis transformed into a powerful narrative of human resilience, teamwork, and the intersection of military precision with civilian aviation. For Daniel Cole, the passenger who had stepped in to assist, the incident marked a turning point, not only in his life, but in the way aviation safety protocols were viewed nationwide. His actions, grounded in years of military training, had underscored the profound value of preparedness and versatility. One of the earliest and most significant legacies of the Flight 582 incident was the heightened awareness around pilot health. The FIA, in collaboration with airlines and medical experts, began reevaluating the frequency and rigor of health screenings for pilots. It became clear that sudden medical emergencies could strike even the most seasoned aviators, and that early detection or preventive measures could save lives. New protocols were developed to include more comprehensive cardiac evaluations, stress testing, and mental health assessments. The goal was to create a more holistic picture of a pilot's fitness, rather than relying solely on periodic checkups. Simultaneously, the industry embraced a stronger emphasis on cross-training for all crew members. The idea was simple yet transformative. In the event a pilot became incapacitated, other crew members, whether co-pilots or even trained passengers, might be called upon to assist. This shift in thinking led to new training modules focusing on pilot incapacitation scenarios, communication during crises, and emergency medical interventions. Airlines implemented simulated exercises where flight attendants and first officers practiced working with passengers who had specialized skills mirroring Daniel's role on Flight 582, the collaboration between military and civilian aviation, spotlighted by the presence of the F-22 escort, also gained renewed attention. Daniel's use of his military call sign had been the catalyst for immediate support from the Air Force pilots, a rare and vital link in the chain of safety. Following the incident, the Department of Defense and FAA explored ways to formalize this coordination. Programs were considered to identify and register qualified military veterans who might be traveling as passengers, enabling real-time alerts to military assets in emergencies. The public's response to the Flight 582 story also shaped its legacy. Daniel's humility and the crew's professionalism became touchstones for media narratives celebrating courage without seeking fame. Schools, aviation museums, and veteran organizations invited Daniel to share his experiences, inspiring new generations to value service, training, and readiness. Lisa Morales, the first officer, became a celebrated figure in the aviation community, symbolizing the strength and skill of women in the cockpit. She spoke at conferences and advocated for expanded opportunities for female pilots and crew members. Her partnership with Daniel remained a powerful example of teamwork, bridging civilian and military worlds. The airline involved in Flight 582 used the incident as a catalyst for continuous improvement. They updated their emergency protocols, invested in better onboard medical equipment, and enhanced communication channels with military and emergency responders. For the passengers of Flight 582, the event left an indelible mark. Many spoke of how the crisis had brought strangers together, breaking down barriers as everyone focused on survival and support. Some formed lasting friendships, bonded by the shared experience. The story even entered popular culture, featured in aviation safety seminars, documentaries, and news retrospectives. It became a case study on how the convergence of skill, preparation, and calm leadership could avert tragedy. On a more personal level, Daniel returned to his quiet life, though he remained available as a consultant and mentor for emergency preparedness in aviation. His journey reminded him daily that the skills honed in one chapter of life could find critical purpose in another, sometimes unexpectedly. As for Captain Robert Harris, the man whose sudden collapse had triggered the crisis, his recovery was slow but steady. The medical interventions and emergency response undoubtedly saved his life. His return to health brought relief to his family and colleagues and prompted further discussions on pilot health monitoring. The investigation into the incident continued to inform policy and medical research, fostering advances that rippled through the aviation industry. Reflecting on the broader implications, aviation experts noted that Flight 582 exemplified the unpredictable nature of flying. Even with advanced technology and extensive training, human factors remained central to safety. The incident reinforced the importance of adaptability, communication, and teamwork, qualities that had shown through every phase of the emergency. The legacy of Flight 582 was ultimately one of hope and progress. It was a reminder that crises could inspire change, and that in moments of peril, ordinary people could rise to extraordinary challenges. As the story of Flight 582 settled into history, it continued to resonate. It became a symbol of how preparation, courage, and cooperation could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. And for those who had lived it, Daniel, Lisa, Captain Harris, the military pilots, the crew, and the passengers, it was a chapter that defined them forever, etched in the annals of aviation as a story worth remembering. Months had passed since the harrowing events aboard Flight 582, but for Daniel Cole and all those involved, the experience remained vividly alive. The crisis had left an imprint, not just on their lives, but on the broader aviation community and beyond. Now, as the dust settled, it was time to reflect on what had transpired and consider the path forward. Daniel found himself drawn back to the cockpit, not in the literal sense, but through his work as a mentor and consultant for aviation safety and emergency preparedness. Invitations came from around the country to speak at aviation conferences, to participate in panels focused on pilot health and crisis management, and to contribute insights bridging military and civilian flight protocols. What struck him most during these engagements was the universal respect and appreciation for the story of Flight 582, not merely for the drama, but for the lessons it taught. Human life, no matter how advanced the technology, depended on human decisions, quick thinking, and the willingness to act. Reflecting on his own role, Daniel often emphasized the teamwork that made survival possible. "No one person wins in situations like this," he would say. "It's the collaboration, the calm under pressure from the crew, the readiness of the military pilots, the emergency teams on the ground that saved lives. I was just a part of a larger machine, working perfectly when it mattered most." Lisa Morales continued to thrive in her aviation career. Her experience on Flight 582, shaping her into a confident and inspiring pilot. She advocated tirelessly for improved training programs, particularly focusing on how flight attendants and first officers could be better equipped to handle sudden emergencies involving incapacitated captains. Together, Daniel and Lisa co-developed training modules that simulated pilot incapacitation scenarios, incorporating lessons from Flight 582. Their partnership became a model for how experience could translate into practical improvements in safety. Meanwhile, Captain Robert Harris had returned home after months of recovery. His heart condition, though serious, was manageable with treatment and lifestyle adjustments. Harris remained grateful to everyone who had helped save him, often speaking about the event with humility and a renewed commitment to safety advocacy. His story added a deeply personal dimension to the larger conversation about pilot health, emphasizing that regular medical checkups and honest reporting of symptoms were not just bureaucratic requirements, but essential measures for life preservation. In Washington, policymakers took note of the Flight 582 incident as a catalyst for regulatory reform. The FIA announced new guidelines increasing the frequency of health screenings for pilots, incorporating advanced cardiac monitoring technologies and psychological assessments. Additionally, programs to integrate military veterans traveling as passengers into emergency response frameworks were piloted at several major airports. The military and civilian agencies worked closely to refine communication protocols, ensuring that future emergencies could benefit from rapid military assistance when needed. Public awareness campaigns were launched to educate passengers about emergency procedures, stressing that the involvement of trained individuals, even passengers, could be a critical factor during crises. In a broader cultural sense, Flight 582 rekindled a conversation about resilience, the ability of ordinary people to perform extraordinary acts when circumstances demand. Communities celebrated the stories of bravery and cooperation, often inviting Daniel, Lisa, and others to share their experiences. Their narratives served as powerful reminders that preparation, training, and calm decisiveness were more than abstract concepts. They were lifelines. Back in his personal life, Daniel found himself balancing the fame with humility. The hero label was something he accepted only in the context of the team effort. He remained grounded, focused on family, and dedicated to helping others be ready for the unexpected. When asked what advice he would give to anyone facing a crisis, his response was simple yet profound. Stay calm, communicate clearly, and never underestimate the power of teamwork. As the aviation community looked to the future, the Flight 582 story became a touchstone, an example of how vulnerability and strength could coexist, and how challenges could lead to meaningful change. Technological advancements continued, with aircraft manufacturers incorporating enhanced monitoring systems designed to detect pilot health anomalies in real time. Airlines increased investments in simulator training, creating scenarios that challenged crews to adapt quickly to incapacitation events. The military's involvement in civilian emergencies, once rare, was explored further, establishing protocols for swift and seamless cooperation that could be activated at a moment's notice. For the passengers of Flight 582, the experience fostered a deeper appreciation for the complexity and dedication behind every flight. Many recounted the story as a reminder that safety was a shared responsibility between pilots, crew, passengers, and the entire support network on the ground and in the skies. On quiet evenings, Daniel would sometimes look up at the night sky, the vast expanse reminding him of that moment when two F-22 Raptors appeared beside the Boeing 737, their presence a beacon of hope. In those reflections, he found peace, knowing that despite the unpredictability of life, preparation and courage could light the way through the darkest moments. Flight 582 was more than a story of crisis. It was a testament to the human spirit's capacity to rise above adversity, a legacy of lessons learned, and a hopeful path forward for safer skies.